Welcome. My name is Emma Merrigan, and I use she, her pronouns. This is the sixth and final part of the series, Accessible Affinity Programming, created by the Center for Diversity and Inclusion at Washington University in St. Louis. This portion will cover some logistics of accessibility that you should incorporate before, during, and after your affinity programming. Some of these will require you putting in some extra work ahead of time so that your participants won't have to do it themselves in order to attend a given event. Disabled people already have to put in a lot of extra time and energy to navigate an ableist world, including inaccessible infrastructure and misinformed assumptions about their disabilities. If you can remove some of those obstacles and let them know that they won't have to do as much of that for your event, you'll be much more likely to have them show up and bring their unique and valuable perspectives with them. Once again, since this explanation is longer and more technical than some of the other videos in this series, we've put together some summary checklists located at the end of this video and in the description. Feel free to skip ahead if you'd like. We'll start with some things you can do beforehand to put some basic accommodations in place and signpost them in your advertising. There are several steps you can take to simultaneously remove access barriers and let your target audience know that accessibility is a key feature of your program. Start by including a simple process for requesting accommodations in your publicity and/or RSVP form. This can be as simple as a line saying, "Send accommodation requests to so-and-so's email by such and such a date." Or you could have an open-ended question on a form asking about what accommodations invitees would like to request. Next, make sure that you are checking those RSVPs and emails regularly to discuss and arrange accommodations ahead of time. A common one that requires some prior planning is sign language interpretation. If you have the budget to provide sign language interpreters proactively, advertising this feature is a great way of letting deaf folks know that they will be welcome at your event. For sign interpreters, you should generally try to book them at least 2 weeks in advance. So it's also a good idea to get a quote for their fees while preparing your program budget in case someone requests that service. Should your budget not allow for an interpreter, a less ideal but still accessible alternative is using live transcription on a program such as Zoom. You can include a line about this feature on program graphics as well, as we've done on the event poster shown on screen right now. Other accommodations can often be arranged through offices like event management and disability resources. However, for the most efficient process that won't require you to make a lot of additional adjustments, try to book your event in an accessible space, whether indoors or outdoors. So, how do you determine if a space is accessible? Some things to think about here are any potential obstacles that disabled participants will have to finding, entering, moving around in, communicating, and exiting your event. On screen and in our video description, we have a list of some of the features disabled participants will have to consider before deciding to attend an event in person. So if you can anticipate some of them and remove obstacles, again, it will make them much more likely to attend. Later on in this video, we'll list some additional resources to help determine whether or not your space is accessible. As you can tell from looking at this list, there are a lot of elements to be aware of, so make sure you allow ample time and personnel to help make adjustments as needed. If you're holding a virtual or hybrid event, there are also some important considerations that have to do with the accessibility of the platform that you use, how people communicate during the event, and how you structure your affinity program itself. Again, in our description, we provided a summary of some of these features, as well as some additional resources later on in this video. A crucial skill for this process is to anticipate and eliminate potential barriers disabled folks might face before, during, and immediately after your affinity program. For example, providing accessibility maps can be a good way to help folks navigate to your space more easily. However, be attentive to what is included and excluded from such maps. In the upper right-hand corner of your screen, we've linked WashU's accessibility maps for the Danforth campus. Right now, take a moment to pause this video and explore the features of these maps. While you do so, think about what features and/or information might be missing that could help disabled folks navigate the campus. All right, if you've explored the campus maps a bit, you may have noticed that WashU's current accessibility map filters shown on screen do not list ADA accessible bathrooms or information about building interiors. So if you were planning an affinity program on the Danforth campus, you may need to do some research on your own to see if the facilities near your space have accessibility features like lift bars on each side of the toilet, adequate space for mobility devices, need clearance under the sinks, or automatic access buttons for entries inside the building. Now, I know that all of this seems like a lot of extra thinking and planning to do in advance, in addition to all the other things you need to get ready for your affinity program. Fortunately, you can find quite a bit of accessibility information about physical spaces at WashU online. For example, you can use the Center for Teaching and Learning's classroom directory, which we've linked on screen right now, to find out what features are available in classrooms on campus. This directory lets you filter rooms for things like wheelchair accessibility, movable furniture, or different kinds of cameras and microphones. For a non-classroom space, you can find some information about a room's features on the Reserve a Space platform by first clicking on the name of the space and then the headers titled Setup Types and Features. Take a moment here to pause and use the CLT directory or the Reserve a Space platform, both linked in the upper right-hand corner. Use these platforms to explore a Danforth space with which you are comfortable finding and navigating. Does it have common accessibility features? Has this conversation made you notice something inaccessible about the space that you hadn't thought of before? Pause the video now to explore. When in doubt, you might even consider getting some basic training in WashU's own occupational therapy tool, which is called a Community Health Environment Checklist Mobility, or CHECM. With proper training, CHECMs allow you to do some practical accessibility checks of a given building or room's infrastructure. We've covered a lot of ground here in regards to accommodations, and it can be difficult to remember all of the possible barriers that can exist in or around an event. On screen and in this video's description, we provided a couple of checklists that can help facilitate this process, though keep in mind that some of them require considerable time, personnel, and budget. Some of the resources also include additional considerations that we haven't discussed here, like accommodations for service animals or requests that attendees use scent-free products. We encourage you to explore each of these resources on your own to determine which will be most practical and useful for your affinity programs. As you can tell, accessibility covers a broad range of logistic aspects. While it's next to impossible to anticipate and accommodate every single one of your participants' accessibility needs at all times, following the principles of universal design is a great starting point. So we've included links with information about universal design principles in the video description as well. All right, now that we've talked about some basic features of accessible spaces, we'll show you what accessibility information to look for on the Reserve a Space platform. On screen, I have information about the Women's Building Formal Lounge. Though the platform doesn't mention this, I happen to know that this building is inaccessible due to the lack of ramps into and elevators inside of the building. So remember that even if the room you reserve is marked accessible, always check to make sure that there are elevator access, entry ramps, and automatic access buttons in the building at a minimum. By comparison, you can see on the reservist-based platform that Tisch Commons in the Duck lists wheelchair accessibility as one of its features. And you may know that it's also on the ground floor near doors with automatic access buttons. When in doubt, ask staff members and event management about the particular space or spaces you want to use and how to make them more accessible. It can also be useful to visit the space in advance if you're able to do so, to determine if there are other access barriers or maintenance issues that can be fixed ahead of time. Once you have as many accommodations in place before the event as you can, it's time for us to talk about how to adjust and accommodate different disabilities as needed at the time of the program itself. The advice in this section includes things you can do shortly before or during an event and has to do with arranging your virtual and/or physical space. As you will learn briefly, the most important things you can do at this stage are providing multiple modes of access, remaining flexible, and creatively removing or reducing access barriers as they arise. And as we discussed in the second video of this series, if you don't know how to accommodate someone, you can always respectfully ask how they typically do something or if you can help them with it. No matter the modality you choose, virtual, in-person, or hybrid, there are some good practices that will help all attendees engage more actively in your programs. Firstly, you can use live transcription on an app such as Zoom during your program so that everyone can follow what is being said with or without sign interpreters. You may also want to have a chat space open in Zoom or elsewhere so that participants can ask questions there. If that option is not available, offer attendees pens and paper or other nonverbal communication alternatives. If speakers at your program are going to use slides or have a script that they plan to follow, make sure to distribute physical and/or large print digital copies and a QR link or short URL to that material so that readers can follow along with a written aid if needed. Another feature that is especially helpful for disabled folks is soft start times and regular body breaks, especially for lengthy programs or ones that require active involvement from participants. Being flexible with your start time, both at the beginning of an event and when coming back from breaks, means accommodating folks who may need longer to find accessible bathrooms, take medicine at certain times, and many other necessary tasks. So give folks a few extra minutes whenever possible and be compassionate when and if they return a little late or need to leave a program briefly or unexpectedly. The tips on this slide relate primarily to in-person events, whether they are held in an indoor or outdoor space. First and foremost, masks and other PPE gear are indispensable features to include in an in-person affinity program during the current pandemic, which is still in progress and represents a much higher risk for disabled and immunocompromised folks. Even if you can't require masks, encourage people to wear them over their nose and mouth whenever they're not eating. And if you can, provide masks and sanitizer at the entrance. Once people enter your event, they will need a place to sit or stand comfortably. So shortly before your event, readjust the furniture as well as you can so that there's ample space in aisles and between seating for mobility devices. If someone needs assistance finding a place, make sure you always ask them before touching or moving their devices, which are in many ways an extension of their bodies. As folks enter the space, try to keep aisles clear, and once the event begins, be sure to indicate to participants where and how they can find the nearest elevators and accessible gender-inclusive bathrooms. Finally, before you start, ask if folks need lighting or volume adjustments before you begin, and be open to making them during the program as well if people ask. Finally, you've put on an accessible, inclusive, and welcoming affinity event, but your work isn't quite finished. Accessibility is a quality that is always flexible and evolving. Therefore, it's crucial that you be open to feedback before, during, and after the event on how you can improve it and remove even more barriers the next time. Just as you've tried to make your program itself accessible, equally necessary is the accessibility of your feedback materials. If someone can't read your survey questions or easily insert them in a way that's comfortable, you may not get the information you need and may therefore keep repeating the same inaccessible practices in future programs. Therefore, whenever you prepare a survey, ask about both the accommodations you've already provided and what you can do in the future to make programs more accessible. In terms of survey formatting, you can follow many of the same tips we discussed in the advertising and promotion videos of this series. Finally, it's also a good practice to be open to multiple types of feedback, whether written, recorded, or synchronous, if you're able to do so ethically and effectively accept these feedback modalities. Considerations should be made, of course, for anonymity and confidentiality as appropriate, but at the very least, allowing survey takers to either write or record their responses audiovisually can be helpful to those who have different mobility and/or access to technology. Thanks again for listening to our discussion on accessible affinity program logistics. On screen and in our video descriptions are the checklist summaries for how to assess the accessibility of an in-person space and a virtual space. Be sure to refer to other resources and guides we've listed for more detailed explanations on why these accommodations are so important. If you'd like to find out more or contribute to the conversation about accessibility, disability, and affinity programming, email WashU's CDI at diversityandinclusion@boostle.edu, or send us a message at Facebook or Instagram at WUSTL CDI. Thank you for joining us.